All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning. Share to thank our TALMUD Torah sponsor for the month of Nisan, Saeed Sima Haken, for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month to express their Hakarat Hatov to Hakadosh Baruch Hu for all of his Nisim and Niflaos. May Hakadosh Baruch Hu continue to bestow his rachmanus upon us, redeem all of the hostages, and bring complete Hatzlacha to Am Yisrael, to EretzYisrael and nishmat Bak's father, Martin Bach Motle ben Chaim Leib HaKohen. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Gregg Rachel Levitan, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Rachel's mother, Sylvia Schreiber, Sarah Gittel Bas Yisroel Baruch. We dedicate our learning nishmat, the 4 soldiers killed yesterday in the rocket attack in the south: Sergeant Michal Ruzal, Ruben Mark, Mordechai Asulain, Tal Shavit, and Ido Testa. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, their neshamas will have an aliyah, and Hakadosh Baruch Hu will shower his protection and providence, his shmir yisir, upon all of our precious soldiers. It's also important for us to recognize that today is Yom HaShoah, and Yom HaShoah always presents interestingly, because generally we take Tisha B'Av to be the day that we focus on the entirety, thousands of years of Jewish tragedy. But yet again, when there is a day that is dedicated to the memory of the 6 million Kedoshim, we of course pause, and we of course note it, and we of course take stock, and especially in the times in which we are living. And we thought that the planned mass annihilation of our people was the last dramatic and epic event that the world would see of just anti-Semitism, and how overwhelming it is to see that we are living in times where once again we witnessed on October 7th, where once again we witness a resurgence in anti-Semitism, where once again we see just the hatred that the world has towards our beautiful and holy people. There's so much to do, and there's so much work, and there's so much that Klal Yisrael has to fix in this world and has to fix within ourselves. But we hope that we provide an aliyah to the neshamas of the 6 million Kedoshim, that recognizing that nothing could ever stamp out the eternal flame of the Jew. Nothing could ever prevent us from actualizing and seizing our destiny. And everything that we do each and every day should provide an aliyah to their neshamas, should propel them higher and higher. And halavai, we await in Hashem the great day when we can embrace them. The Melech Mashiach comes, Tchias HaMesim comes, and the Geula once again brings us all together. And we'll see with that. Let us begin. We have a lot to accomplish today. Really a lot to accomplish. I'm waiting for that short blot. I think I saw it. In Bava Basra at some point. So, all right. Well, we somehow, some way, we always make it. So let's say, we are picking up, today's daf is Samech 68, and we are picking up on Samech Zayin Lamed Beis 67b, pretty much right the middle of the page. If you see Tosfos Hai Mashkanta, that's on the right hand side of the page. If you just move your finger leftward and 2 lines down, you'll be exactly where we are. Right? I think that's where we left off, correct? Yes. Good. So the Gemara says, Hai Mashkanta ba'asra de Misalki. So let's say, so remember again, in yesterday's daf, we saw something very interesting, that there were 2 types of, many more than 2, but for our purposes now, 2 types of loan arrangements, loan agreements. One type of loan arrangement was what we called Asra de Misalki, Mashkanta ba'asra de Misalki, which is where the borrower has the ability to prepay the debt and essentially remove the loaner, the lender, from the collateral. Right? So in other words, Reuven lends Shimon $10,000. Right? Shimon goes ahead and gives Reuven a piece of land as the collateral. Shimon decides to go ahead and pay the debt off in 3 years. He has the ability to do so and remove, so to speak, Reuven from the collateralized property. Then there were other places, what we call Mashkanta ba'asra de lo Misalki, which means no. The idea over here is that if Reuven is lending Shimon money for 5 years, so having the use of the collateralized property is part of the benefit. Not ribis, but part of the benefit. And therefore, in those locales, the borrower was not permitted to pay off the debt early. So now the Gemara says as follows. So Rav Papa and Rav Huna Yeshua say, in Hai Mashkanta ba'asra de Misalki, in a place where, in a locale where it was customary, where if the borrower wants to pay off the debt early, he has the ability to do so, thereby removing the lender from the collateralized property. Ein bal chov gova himena. So we'll say, so let me tell you the principle outside, and then we'll see the application. Essentially, in a place, let's work backwards. In a place where the borrower cannot pay off the debt earlier than the duration. So again, Reuven lent Shimon $10,000 for 5 years. So now Shimon gives Reuven a piece of property as collateral. So if you go with the idea that borrower cannot pay off the debt early, that essentially means that collateralized property is treated as a sale. It's treated as a sale to the lender. Okay? So there, conversely, if halacha l'maisa, again, the borrower does have the ability to pay off the debt early and remove the lender from the collateralized property whenever he wants to. So therefore, by definition, it's not a sale. Because it's not a sale, therefore the property is not considered owned by the lender. As a result, the Gemara says, Ein bal chov gova himenu. Let's say the lender, in this case his name is Reuven, right? Reuven himself owes money to Levi. Right? So now, in this type of situation, so Reuven's lender would not be able to seize from Reuven this collateralized property, because since at any point in time Shimon could come along and pay off the debt, therefore Reuven is not the owner of it. Because Reuven is not the owner, therefore Reuven's lender cannot seize that collateralized property from Reuven. Next, if Reuven were to die, this collateralized property would not be considered part of Reuven's estate, and therefore Reuven's firstborn would not go ahead and take a double portion in it. Ushvias misham tasa. Furthermore, the presence of this collateralized property does not prevent Shemitah from canceling the debt from Reuven to Shimon. The kamdenam nirabos in all of these cases is that halacha l'maisa, because at any point in time Shimon has the ability to come and pay off the debt. Therefore, what? Reuven is not considered to be the owner of this collateralized property. That's the idea. However, now the reverse is true as well. Uba asu delo misalki. But let's say again, Reuven lent Shimon $10,000 for a duration of 5 years. And in this particular locale, the custom is that borrower does not have the ability to pay off the debt before the due date. Therefore, the collateralized property is considered to be a sale to the lender, and therefore the lender is considered to be the owner of that property. As a result, the Gemara says, so bal chov gova himenu. If, it's very interesting, if Reuven the lender, himself owes someone else money, Reuven's creditor could collect this collateralized property as payment. Ubechar notal pishnayim. And if Reuven were to die, Reuven's bechar would collect a double portion in this property. Ve'in shvius misham tasa. And the existence of this property, this collateralized property, would prevent Shemitah from canceling the debt from Reuven to Shimon. So Rabbi say, this is a very dramatic Gemara, because what the Gemara is saying is like this, is that essentially, in a locale where borrower cannot pay off the debt early, collateral is considered sold and owned by the lender. And to the point, by the way, that the lender's creditor could collect his collateralized property in satisfaction of his debt. To the point that if the lender dies, the lender's bachar takes double portion in this property. And to the point that halacha l'maisa, the Shemitah will not cancel this debt, because the presence of this collateralized property treats it as if the debt is already quasi-collected. Quite fascinating. So also listen to this. So now comes along. So again, if you have a collateral in an area, in a locale where it was common, where it's possible for the borrower to pay off the debt early and remove the lender from the collateralized property whenever the borrower is ready to pay off the debt. So remember again, that means that when the borrower shows up to pay the debt, the lender is totally removed from the property, even from the dates that are in the baskets. In other words, both say, so actually really the dates on the mats. Rashi points out over here, Kishegodrin Tmarim, Shotrin, Machazol Stachos Antikolin, Vinofan Atmar Maleim, Bimba Vishilin Lama Osav, Just listen to this. So imagine for a moment again, same case. Reuven lent Shimon $10,000. So now for 5 years. So Shimon goes ahead and gives Reuven a field, a date, palm grove, right? A field of palm trees, of date palms. So now what happens? So now this is now a locale where borrower has the ability to pay off the debt whenever he wants. So 3 years in, Shimon shows up with the money for the loan. And meanwhile, again, Reuven was getting ready to harvest the dates from the date palms. How do you go ahead and harvest dates? Well, at least initially you could shake the palm tree, you put a mat underneath the palm tree, and the dates fall onto the mat. So the Gemara says that when Shimon shows up with the money to pay off the debt, so the field in its entirety goes back to Shimon, even the dates that are sitting on the mat. In other words, you might have thought that maybe if Reuven shook off the dates, then halacha l'maisa, those should be his. Kamash Malon, when Shimon shows up, the field and anything in the field automatically goes back to Shimon. So the Gemara says, however, we'll say, obviously, if let's say the dates fell into baskets, and Reuven had picked up the baskets, so by picking up the baskets, Reuven acquires the date. But according to the opinion that says that the utensils of a purchaser have the ability to acquire, even in the property of the seller. So the halacha is, so kana lokeach afilu delo agbeinu bisisani kaninu. So we'll say in that case, halacha l'maisa, if let's say Reuven was using his baskets and the dates were gathered in Reuven's baskets, even if Reuven didn't lift up the baskets, halacha l'maisa, he would acquire the dates. So we'll say, so again, here are the takeaways. Here are the takeaways to remember. So number one, two different types of loan structures. In other words, can you pay off the loan early or not? So that depended on minhag hamakom. Now I will say, now the reason why that's important is because the relationship between the lender and the collateral is really different in those two different loan structures. In a case where borrower can't pay off the loan early, so the lender is really considered to be the owner of the collateral, which makes sense. Why? What's the logic? Since we know that lender has it for the entire duration, and there is no way for borrower to change that, he becomes the de facto owner. To the point the Gemara even suggests that the lender's creditor could seize that collateralized property as satisfaction of his debt, that if the lender dies, his kid, his bachar gets pishnayim, and that Shemitah won't cancel the debt because since he already owns the collateral, it's as if the debt has been paid. Masha'en came, conversely, if halacha l'maisa, we're talking about a locale where you can't pay off a debt early, in that case, the lender is not considered to be the owner of the collateralized property. He has use of it, but l'maisa, and that's the Gemara is illustrating over here, as soon as borrower shows up with money, so he gets back his field. Not only that, even if Reuven's in the middle of going ahead and shaking off the dates, and there are dates on the ground, everything goes back to Shimon. The only exception is if Reuven was gathering the dates in his buckets, and his pails, and his utensils, then his utensils could acquire the dates for him. Incredible. Let's get right there. So Pshita Basra, the Masalki, V'amr lo mistalikna, Ha'kamr lo mistalikna. So we'll say, if let's say Reuven is lending Shimon money, and they're doing this in a locale where normally the borrower could prepay the debt if he wants to. You understand, prepay is the wrong word. There's a better word for it. Or is it called prepaying? Okay, prepay. In other words, paying before the maturity date. Okay, good. So, very safe. In a locale, ultimately, again, I'm sorry?
I was waiting for prepay.
I thought prepay has like a connotation of, like, but I guess it doesn't make sense, like, to prepay before the transaction. Obviously, it doesn't make sense because it's a loan. Okay, as long as that's the right term. Great, prepay. I'm sorry? Early termination. Okay, good. All right, as long as prepay is correct, good. I'm happy to go. I just didn't know if it was correct. So, or early termination, good. So the Gemara says over here. So if you're living in a place ultimately again where you can prepay the debt, v'amar lo mistalikna. Now we'll say, now watch this. Now if halacha l'maisa, the Malva said, listen, I'll lend you the money, but on the condition that you can't. There's no early termination. There's no prepay. Then both say Dilo Masalki. Obviously, both say then that's what they agreed to. That's what they agreed to. So those we saw this in yesterday's daf. With with what was the lady's name?
Nalva.
Thank you. Navla. Right, Navla. So obviously, again, when you lend money, if you, the lender, make stipulations, that's it. You have the right? That's the part of the purse strings. So even if we're living in a locale where prepayment is accepted, if lender says, I don't accept those terms, and I'm lending you money on the condition that there is no prepayment, and Shimon accepts the money, okay, those are the conditions of the loan. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Listen to this. What about in a place where ultimately, again, the local custom was you can't prepay? Va'amar mistalikna. And lender says, you know what, I give you the right to prepay. Now, that's a big thing. That's a big thing where Reuven, the lender, is giving Shimon the right to early terminate, the right to prepay. So I will say, so now essentially here's what's interesting. So really, lender is giving borrower a right. He's giving him a right that he would not normally be entitled to. So here's the shaila. So what's ta'alocha? Tzarech l'mikna minei o lo? So I will say, so this is very interesting. Does that require a Kabbalah Sakinyan? Normally, when you want to convey something, so conveying something requires a mechanism, a kinyan. Remember this from Hazav. So the shaila is, does Reuven have to do a kinyan, like a chalipin, a sudar? Does he have to do some type of kinyan, ultimately, again, with Shimon the borrower, so that Shimon now, so to speak, acquires the right to prepay? So Rav Papa Amar Lo Tzarech L'Mikna Minei, Rav Sheish Beid Rav Idi Amar Tzarech L'Mikna Minei. It's a machlokes v'halchasa. The halacha is Tzarech L'Mikna Minei. So this is actually very interesting. So the halacha is that Reuven and Shimon will need to do some type of kinyan for Reuven to convey this right over to Shimon. Quite fascinating. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Amar Ezel va'ayisi zuzi lo achal. So let's listen to this. So now let's talk about a situation where let's say again, the truth is this could be either in a case of let's go with the case of, let's say, prepay, right? So let's say Shimon says to Reuven calls him up, I'm coming over with the money. I'm coming to pay back $10,000. Essentially, the moment that Shimon indicates that he is on the way with the money, Reuven can no longer eat any of the peros of the field. Rashi says over here, Lo achil, horil v'hamos mukhanim lo, v'lo nasnu lo rishus lios, shomet va'ochel, uba'asr de masalki kai. So Rashi says over here, we're talking about a situation of prepayment. So halacha might say, any scenario where prepayment is permitted, as soon as Shimon says, I have the money, and I'm coming over, right? I'm ready to come and give it to you. At that point, halacha l'maisa, Reuven is no longer permitted to go ahead and consume produce. However, what happens if he says, Ezel va'isi zuzi lo achol, Ezel ve'itrich va'isi zuzi? So let's say Shimon says to Reuven, just wanted to let you know, I'm in the process of getting the money together. So what is the impact of that statement? Ravina Amar Achol. Ravina says, no, Reuven could continue to eat produce. Or Marzutra Amar Lo Achel. And Marzutra says, no, he can no longer eat. Lo Achel. Interestingly enough, the halacha is Reuven can't continue to eat. In other words, it sounds like what's happening over here is that once the lender essentially says once the borrower says to the lender, I am in the process of repayment, at that point in time, lender loses the right to consume the produce. Incredible. Rav Kahana Rav Papa, Rav Ashi, Lo Achli Ben Echaisa. So it's actually an interesting case over here. So Rav Kahana, Rav Papa, and Rav Ashi would not consume produce from a field. Ben Echaisa. Remember again, we had an Echaisa in yesterday's daf. This was what the Gemara suggested. The Gemara suggested that one of the ways to go ahead and essentially, so we'll say, when Reuven lends Shimon money, right, and Shimon gives $10,000 for 5 years, and Shimon gives Reuven a collateralized field. Reuven's going to eat the produce of that field. The problem is, it just looks like a ribbis transaction. So the Gemara suggested that one of the ways that we could go ahead and eliminate the ribis transaction is how nechaisa. Now, what does nechaisa mean? Now, nechaisa can mean one of two things. Either you could do like a mashkanta desura, which is beautiful, which is let each year represent a diminution of the debt. So at the end of 5 years, let's say, for argument's sake, it's $2,000 worth of produce a year. 5 years. At the end of 5 years, what does Shimon owe Ruvain? What does he owe Ruvain? Nothing, right? That's mashkanta. The way mashkanta desura worked was use of the collateralized property drew down the debt to the maturity date where the debt was zero. Okay, then there's nechaisa. Nechaisa means that essentially there is a certain amount that the debt is diminished each year. Now it could be a nominal amount, it could be some amount, but it's not the full amount. The idea that Rashi explained yesterday is when you do nechaisa, that essentially has the status of a sale. What about the fact that the value of the field, of the diminution, is way less than the value of the produce? That's fine. How do we take care of that? You're buying the future right. You may get no produce. There may be a drought. There may be anything else that happens. So therefore, you're paying a diminished amount. That's nechaisa. And that essentially makes it like a sale, so that the lender owns the field. It's through a sale. And therefore, there's no ribis issue involved. Okay. The Gemara did say that a Talmud Chacham should not really participate in a nechaisa transaction. Right? Why? Because Rabbi saying not everyone knows the mechanics of these kinds of things. And so it looks like whatever it looks like, right? It could look ungood, right? That's what we're going to go with, ungood, good challenged. So the Gemara says as follows. So therefore, Rav Kana, Rav Pava, Rav Ashi, lo achli ben nechaisa. Ultimately, they would not eat produce from this type of transaction. Ravina achal ben nechaisa. Ravina would. Amar Marzutra, my time of demand achal ben nechaisa. So Marzutra said to Ravina, so what's the pshat, right? Why would you feel comfortable partaking of this? So the Gemara says, to which Ravina responded, Midi dahavi asdei nechuza, asdei achuza. So what's the difference? He said, because the truth is, it's no different than stei achuza. Now both say, we're going to see the case of stei achuza in just a moment. So the Gemara says, stei achuza, lav anfa gavdeka achal peri tuva, amar rachmanus type of sameches, kaparikla ba'arba zuzi. So Rabbi said, this is very interesting. So stei achuza means ancestral land. Let's say a person goes ahead and consecrates their ancestral land to the Beis HaMikdash. So Rabbi said, so the halacha is that there is a pro forma redemption amount for stei achuza. Right? So let's say again, you makdish your field to the Beis HaMikdash. It goes on a Yovel cycle. So now you want to redeem your stei achuza. So how much do you redeem your stei achuza? So there's a formula. Essentially, it's a sela for every single base core. But what do you see from here? Essentially, the redemption of the stei achuza is not really based on actual output of the field, because you can have a field that produces a lot, a field that produces a little. There's a formula, a sela per base core. So what do you see from here, says Ravina? What do you see from here, says Ravina? That halacha l'maisa, a pro forma formula ultimately again works. And if it works for redemption of the Beis HaMikdash, it should also work to go ahead and avoid any kind of ribis situation. To which the Gemara says, "Hachanami loshna uman." So that actually sounds pretty compelling. So why would you have a problem with that? Uman da'as Rabosai Samech Chesam Aleph 68a, second line down. Uman da'as, the one the Rabbanim who did not like the nechaisa, Amar lachas de'achuza hegdishi for rachmanus ukma pidyon hacha havahi umechsek ribis. So I'll say once again, the Gemara says it's not really a fair comparison, right? Stei achuza is a redemption case. It's a redemption case. This that we're talking about over here is a loan case. See, I will say here's the problem. Anything to do with loans, where it even has the appearance that you're getting more than principal, it just doesn't look right. Now, again, to be clear, I will say everyone is agreeing that nechaisa works. It's just whether or not the Talmud Chacham should really go ahead and participate in such a transaction or not. Okay, but in any event, the Gemara is suggesting, although I hear what you're saying by stei achuza, it's apples and oranges. Amar Rav Ashi, so let's listen. This is actually very interesting. So Rav Ashi said as follows: the elders of Masa Machasi said to me, "Stam mashkanta shasa." The minimum duration of collateral is a year. What does that mean? L'may nafkamina. What exactly does that mean? The achale shasa matzi misalikle. The ilo lo matzi misalikle. So this is very interesting. But what Rav Ashi is suggesting as follows: even if you live in a locale where prepayment is permitted, so therefore Halacha L'maisa Reuben goes down and lends Shimon $10,000 for 5 years. Shimon comes up with the money earlier than 5 years, so Shimon has the right to prepay. However, Rav Ashi says you can never prepay earlier than 1 year. See, interesting, right? So in other words, that as a lender, I'm always guaranteed 1 year worth of use of the collateral. That's part of the benefit. That's part of the benefit. I also understand in general. So remember, lending money is it's a loss leader if you're Jewish, right? I don't mean in the rachmanus sense. I mean in the monetary sense. You're not charging interest. So remember again, I will say the collateral represents a way to benefit a little bit. Obviously, as we see over here, the collateral itself has to be structured, right? So again, we see a good way to structure it. Just lock in a minimal diminution amount, which then transforms it from collateral into a sale that allows you to benefit from the produce. So Rav Ashi is coming along and saying that even in locales where prepayment was permitted, prepayment was never permitted earlier than a year. This way, again, the lender knows that Allah L'maisa, he's got principal plus a year of benefit. I can't really say it like that, because when you say it like that, it sounds a lot like ribbis, right? So really what it means is he has the principal. Again, I will say, I just want to point out what's happening over here. Just so you understand, you think to yourself, come on, like this is a lot of legal gymnastics over here. So we'll say, so understand, Chazal have to do this. Why do Chazal have to do this? Because people love their money. People love their money. And because people love their, right, because we love our money, people are going to be very hesitant to lend money in a non-interest market. So Chazal have to come up with these mechanisms to keep the loan market flowing. Right? So these are certain legal loopholes is even the wrong word. There's certain legal frameworks that Chazal are creating to allow for interest-free loans where somehow the lender is still able to recapture some level of benefit. That's what's happening over here. All of this is, we'll say, whose interest does this serve? Who are they helping over here? They're helping the borrower. They are assuring that there's going to be a free market of loans, of interest-free loans available. Again, but at the same time allowing for the needs of the lender to somehow be met. So again, even if prepayment is permitted, never earlier than a year. The elders of Mas Mechasi said to me, my mashkanta dishchuna. My mashkanta, what's the lashon of mashkanta? So we'll say, okay, we know mashkanta means collateral, but what is the etymology of mashkanta? Dishchuna gabe. It is a piece of property or an item that resides by you. By you means the lender. So what does that mean? Ladina de bar Metzia. So I will say, this is absolutely fascinating. The halacha of bar Metzia is the following halacha. I will say, let's say I'm selling my property. The halacha of bar Metzia means that I must give my neighbors the rights of first refusal on my property. That's the halacha, dina de bar Metzia, right? So I will say, and by the way, the halacha of Dina Bar Metzia, we're actually going to talk about Dina Bar Metzia. I don't know if it's above Metzia or above Asra, but we're going to talk about it, and it's actually quite fascinating. To the point, I will say that let's say I'm selling my land, right? And Reuven and Shimon are my neighbors, but I go ahead and I sell to Levi. So we'll say, so the halacha is Reuven and Shimon actually have legal recourse against me, and I have the ability to actually void that sale. Now again, they have to pay the price, right? They don't get it at a discount, but Lamaisa, they get first rights. That's the end of our Metzia. We'll say, watch this. So now let's say Reuven lent Shimon $10,000 for 5 years, and now what happens? So Shimon wants to sell the property. Wants to sell the collateralized property. So we'll say, what's the halacha? Reuven the lender has first rights to buy that property. Isn't that incredible? Reuven, the lender, has first rights to buy that property. The collateralized property is in Baltimore and Reuven lives in New Jersey, right? It doesn't matter because Reuven right now is the quote-unquote the owner of that collateralized property. He is the bar Metzia. He's considered to be the neighbor and he has first rights to buy it. Pretty incredible. That's the halacha. Okay. feel like I'm much more excited about that halacha than any of you. Okay, fine. Yeah, I thought it was interesting. Amar Rava, les hilchasa, lo ketarshi papanai, velo ketarshi mechuzanai, velo kechachiri narshai. So Rava comes along and says, the halacha, remember again, tarsha, remember our tarsha case? Tarsha is where you're selling produce at a higher rate, at a higher future rate, but you're not really mentioning anything about a current lower rate, right? So I'll sell you a bushel of wheat for $1,000, right? For $1,000, I'll deliver it to a year from now. I'm not saying anything about it. If you pay me right now, I'll give it to you for $800, right? That's the tarsha. So Rava comes along and says that, and also remember again the Rav Papa tarsha. Rav Papa was the beer merchant. Who said again, I'll sell you in Tishrei if you want, but I'm selling you in Nisan prices. Why? Because Rav Papa said, number one, my beer doesn't spoil. Number two, what? I don't need money. So I'm happy to sell you now, but I'm not taking a loss. But Saeed, after the Shir, said a wonderful chap over here. This was the first, Moses date vodka. This was date beer. Why was date beer more expensive in Nisan than it was ultimately in Tishrei? That's like, because it was Kasher Pesach, right? Lemais again, it was usable the entire month. Incredible. I was supposed to say, you think high prices for Pesach is a new thing. It's not. It says all this klal Yisrael. There was also only half the amount of beer in the barrel, right? When you opened it up, right? It was also. Right, so I think Marcel like this. So Rava says that halacha l'maisa, the halacha does not follow the tarsha of Rav Papa, nor does it follow the shtara of the mechuzan. That was another one of these mechanisms, and it does not follow the chachire and the arshai. Now I will say, if you look at Rashi says over here, chachire is a different. Excuse me. Is a different case. Rashi says chachire hamakabel sodom michavero ba'asara kurin l'shana kein tasa harbe bein tasa harbe bein tasa ma'at. So I will say a chachirus is like a lease agreement. Now the lease agreement says like this: essentially, again, renter or lessor agrees to pay the owner a certain amount of produce. Now you're locked into that amount, whether the field produces that amount or doesn't produce that amount. So the Gemara says, "Kitarshi papanai, kitarshi dra papa." So we'll say, so what does it mean when it says we don't follow the tarsha papanai? That's the tarsha Rav Papa that we just said before. That was Rav Papa with the date beer. Shtari mechuzanai. What's the shtari of the mechuzah? Right? What's the mechuzah shtar? The zokfi le'leravcha akarna v'kasfi le'bishtara. So we'll say what they would do over here. And again, we're going to talk about this more, but we already mentioned this. Shabbos said they would go ahead and essentially take the profit, add it onto the principal, and write all of that onto the shtar. The kasle b'shtara. So the Gemara says, Mi yemar dahavi ravcha. Who says that there is going to be any type of benefit? So that essentially is a mechanism, or that essentially was a structure where, let's say again, I would go ahead and give Ruvain money. I'd give him money. I say, Ruvain, go out and do money, or for that matter, again, go out and sell produce. And we assume that the money can recognize X amount of profit, or the produce could recognize X amount of profit, and therefore, again, you're going to pay me back principal plus profit. The only problem is who says that the profit is going to be realized. So the Gemara says, Abba Avitachi. Ultimately, again, my father would conduct himself in this way. So I'll say, so first let's take a quick look at Rashi. Rashi says, the Zakfi Ravcha Karna. So listen to this. Shekonim pragmatia balibatim, v'nosim l'tgarim, l'machtzis schar, v'shaman kach v'kach yiyah bohen, v'zokfin machtzis hasar schar imakeren, v'kosin v'shtar, ploni chayiv l'ploni kach v'kach l'zman ploni. So we'll say, now watch this. Let me give you the simple idea over here. So let's say, for example, Reuven gives Shimon merchandise. And he says to Shimon, here's merchandise. The word merchandise, right, the we'll call it the wholesale value of the merchandise is $1,000. But I believe that you could sell this merchandise for $500 profit. So now you owe me $1,500. You owe me $1,500. Okay? So we'll say, so now again, that's not ribis. Why is it not? Right? It doesn't sound like it's ribis. Why? Because it is principal plus the profits. In other words, and that Reuven only, remember again, we saw this whole thing where it only becomes a loan at the time that the profit is realized, right? And therefore, again, essentially, you have $1,500 in your pocket. You get back $1,500. Now, what's in this, by the way, for Shimon? What's in it for Shimon? So Shimon usually gets to use the money for some duration of time, right? So Shimon could transact his own business deals with that $1,500 as long as at the end of the day he comes back to me with $1,500. That's the idea. So the Gemara says the problem with this transaction, the problem with it is, who says that halacha l'maisa, the money or the profit is going to be realized. So the problem is that Shimon is on the hook for the $1,500, even though the profit itself may not be realized. So Amar bar Amir Rabashi, Abba Avatachi. So my father used to transact business like this. And Abba say essentially again, if Shimon would show up, right, and say, listen, we did not realize the profit, so father would believe him, and that would be it. Amarle, that's fine when the borrower, we're calling him the borrower, is alive. So the Gemara says, my hobby. What happens if halacha l'maisa Shimon were to die, right? And now again, the transaction falls before his yarshim. What would happen? To which the Gemara says, this is incredible. So havi kishkaga shiyatzem lifnei hashalit. So we'll say, so remember again, the son of Merimar. So Mar bar Merimar was the one who said this. Mar bar Merimar said, what happens if the father dies? We'll say the words of tzaddikim, now he was just asking in a hypothetical, but the words of tzaddikim carry incredible weight and incredible impact. So what happened? V'nach nafshei da Meimar. Ultimately, again, Meimar passed away. All right, a very, very dramatic Gemara. So the Gemara goes weiter. Chachiri narshoy diksivi hachi. So we'll say, what's the lease agreement of the narshoy? They said as follows. Mashkan le planya, are le planya, v'hader chach ramine. All right, so we'll say, this is a very interesting transaction over here. So here's what occurred. So we'll say, so now, Reuven lent Shimon $10,000 for 5 years. Shimon gave Reuven collateralized, right? Shimon gives Reuven property collateral. So far, so good. Reuven now leases the property back to Shimon. Okay? And now both say they have a lease agreement. And what's the lease agreement? The lease agreement is that Shimon agrees to give Reuven, 200 bushels of wheat a year. That's the agreement. So we'll say, so it's a loan, collateralized property, and then again, lender leases the collateralized property back to the borrower for some fixed amount of produce. So the Gemara says, here's the problem. So when exactly is it? How is it happening? Ultimately, again, that halacha l'maisa, the lender is acquiring it in order to convey it back to the borrower. So look at Rashi just a moment. Emas kanye, Rashi says, Malva lahach sada da'akanye nehile lebailim b'toras chachirus, nimtza notel ribis ketzutza, share'in torach ba, va'av im tiloke lo yavse b'michirasa klum. So we'll say, here's the problem. The problem the Gemara says is, in order to lease something back, you really have to be the owner of it. How exactly is it that Reuven is becoming the full-fledged owner of this field to lease it back? And the problem is this just has the appearance of complete ribis. Right? So you're leasing back collateralized property and getting a fixed amount from that property each and every year. That just sounds like ribis. So the Gemara says, Va'idna dekakasi hachi, kanina meha, v'shahina kama idni, v'hadar chachra kedeshelo tinal deles bifnei lavin. Shabridami. So the Gemara says, but now, ultimately again, now that we go ahead and we write the following formulation. Kanina mine, right? I, the lender, have acquired this from the borrower. Vishahina kama idne, and the lender holds on to it for some amount of time, and then he subsequently leases it back. And we do say all of this. Why? So we'll say, so essentially, what the Gemara is suggesting over here is the way to circumvent this is allow the collateralized property to remain in the possession of the lender for a little bit of time. So therefore, he quote unquote becomes the owner, and now it's a proper lease back. And we're good to go, right? And we do all of this. Why? Kadesh lo tinal delas bifnei lavin. So we'll say. So remember again. To be honest, there is an element of discomfort with all of these arrangements. There really is, because we'll say, because to a certain degree, not that it's legal fiction, it's legal reality, but it's a workaround. It really is a workaround. But why are we doing the workaround? Shelo tinol delis bifnei lavin. I will say because we are concerned that if we don't have some type of workaround, a legal workaround, that's what? That halacha l'maisa, people are going to stop lending money. To which the Gemara says, "V'lav milsu." The Gemara says, "No. At the end of the day, we reject this. We reject this. We do not like what we call this nashoin lease, this chachiri nashoi. We don't like it. So we don't like the tarshos that we saw before. We don't like the nashoin lease. We don't like any of this stuff. So what can we do? I will say. So now we come to a very important mishnah. Here we go. Ein moshivin chanvani lemachtzis schar, velo yitain moos likach ben peros lemachtzis schar. So we'll say, so okay, let's talk about an arrangement outside for just a moment, and then plug this in to the Gemara. So here we go. So imagine the following scenario: Reuven and Shimon want to go into business together, okay? And now Reuven wants to be the capital partner, right? He wants to fund the initiative, and Shimon's going to be the working partner. There's a sweat, right? Sweat capital versus sweat equity, right? So capital, right? So Reuven's going to invest the money, and Shimon's going to do the work. Okay, so now watch this. So essentially, I'll say Reuven says like this: look, here I'm advancing you $10,000. So the way this is going to work is essentially $10,000 is a loan to you, right? That's really what he's doing. Because remember, I'm sorry, one more piece, and they're going to split profits 50-50. That's how it's going to work. So I will say, so now, again, so fine. So far, so good. So I will say, so now what happens? So therefore, essentially, $10,000 of this is loaned to Reuven, right? And $5,000 is loaned to Reuven, and $5,000 is Reuven managing for Shimon. Right, and any profits that they realize will be split 50-50. So therefore, whatever profits Shimon realizes on his 50% are his, and the other 50% accrues for Reuven. What's the problem with this transaction? So let's play this out. So now what ends up happening? What ends up happening is, let's say they realize, Baruch Hashem, $5,000 in profit. So good. $2,500 goes to Shimon, right, who is the sweat equity, right, and $2,500 goes to Reuven, who's the capital partner. The problem with this transaction, I will say, is it appears that what's really happening over here is like this: that as a reward, so to speak, for Shimon's loan, because Shimon received the loan of $5,000 from Reuven, right, because half of the equity belongs to him. As a reward for the loan that Shimon received from Reuven, he's managing Reuven's money, right? So in other words, remember, because Shimon is holding all of the money and managing all of the money. So 50% of that money is his from a loan from Reuven. The other 50% essentially is a pikadon. It's a pikadon that still belongs to Shimon. But who's managing the pikadon? Right? Shimon. Right? Sorry, I said the wrong name. Reuven, right? The pikadon belongs to Reuven. Let's start this once more. Okay, now you got this. I'm sorry, let me be clear. Reuven and Shimon are going into business with each other, right? So Reuven is the equity partner. He's investing $10,000. They've agreed, split profits 50-50. How do we view that $10,000? Essentially, $5,000 of it is a loan to Shimon, right, who's the working partner, and $5,000 of it is viewed as a pikadon. It's a pikadon that ultimately, again, Shimon is managing for Reuven. They now realize $5,000 of profit. $2,500 of that goes to Shimon, the working partner. $2,500 of that goes to Reuven, the equity partner. Beautiful. Only one problem is that when that profit is realized, the way it looks in halacha is essentially that Reuven is being rewarded for the loan that he gave to Shimon. What's the reward that Reuven is getting for the loan he gave to Shimon? The fact that Shimon is managing his money. Because Reuven lent Shimon money, therefore again, Shimon is managing Reuven's pikadon. Shimon is managing Reuven's money as well in this partnership. That looks like ribbis. But the good news is, there's a very simple answer. What's the simple answer? Pay Shimon a wage for running the business. So in addition to the profit sharing agreement, Shimon also gets a wage, a separate wage for managing the business. Therefore, when Shimon manages Reuven's 50%, that's not viewed as ribis. Instead, it's viewed as a separate service that Reuven is paying for. Now, that is essentially called a heter iska. That is called the heter iska. So again, the prohibited version of this is called iska. It's called iska. So again, essentially, this is what we're describing over here is a very common partnership arrangement. What the Gemara is saying is, the problem just is, the act of Shimon managing Reuven's 50% looks like that is a favor that Shimon is doing for Reuven because of the money that Reuven lent to Shimon. Shimon's 50%. Simple way to avoid it, just pay Shimon an additional fee, an additional salary for managing the business. That's it. That's the entire Mishnah. So here we go. Now we can read it inside. Oh, good. Okay, we're doing great. So literally, again, you can't set up a merchant with produce with a 50% profit sharing agreement. Nor can you just advance money for Shimon to purchase produce in a profit sharing agreement. Unless, of course, you give Shimon an additional salary as a worker. So I will say that what I just told you outside is exactly what the Mishnah is saying. Similarly, again, you can't go ahead and create a partnership agreement to raise hens for a 50% partnership split, again, without this salary. You can't valuate. You know what? So we're going to explain all this in the Gemara. You can't valuate ultimately agalin, our calves, siyachin, our foals, young horses, lemechza for 50% partnership profit sharing. Unless, of course, you give Shimon, literally a salary for his effort as well as reimbursement for feed. But you can go ahead and accept agalin and scholin for 50% profit sharing. Again, we're going to explain all this in the Gemara. And you could raise them up until they are 1/3 of maturity. And ultimately, again, a donkey up until it's strong enough to carry a load. So again, this is what we call iska, which is the prohibited version of this agreement, versus a heter iska. All heter iska, Rabbi says that in the profit sharing agreement, ultimately we're going to pay Shimon a separate salary for managing the partnership. That way, because he's getting a salary, we don't view Shimon's managing of Reuven's 50% of the partnership equity as ribis. That's it. Says the Gemara, Tana, Kipal Batal. So we'll say, so now the Gemara says, the Mishnah said, that, so we'll say, what's the salary? What's the salary that Shimon gets? So the Gemara says, Kipal Batal. Now, both say Paul Batal literally means like an idle worker. Now, what does that mean? Micah Paul Batal. What does Paul Batal mean? Now, both say literally Paul Batal could sound like you pay someone the amount of money that they would be willing to accept not to work. How much money would you be willing to accept not to work? I think we actually have government programs like this, right? How much money, right? What is it worth it to you not to have to go to work? So the Gemara says, "Ma'ika Paul Batal." So I'm going to say, "I'm Rabbi Ke Paul Batal shall also malacha." No. The Batal minay. What it means is like this. I will say, I have a job. So Rashi's example is a nagar or a nafach, right? I'm a blacksmith. So I will say, so essentially, how much money would I be willing to take to stop my primary profession and accept a lower paying profession? Right? That delta, that difference, that's Kipal Batal. So the Gemara says, Utzricha. Now, here's what's interesting. The Gemara says, now remember, why do I need all of these different cases? So the Gemara says, Utzricha. Because also remember again, the Mishnah illustrated this principle with two cases. Chenveni, which is a shopkeeper, and in that case, I, the investment partner, or Reuven, is buying the produce. And case number two, I will say, ultimately, again, was more like a merchant where Reuven is advancing the money. So why do you need both cases? Gemara says, I'll tell you why. If it would have just said the case of the shopkeeper, so a chenveni, all you have to do is pay shipping. So what says here, we're talking over here that halacha l'maisa. How do you go ahead? Actually, no, say All right, we're gonna stop over. We're doing fine. We're doing fine. I'll say, there are two options. Option number one is we could blow through this and not understand it and get the blot done. Or we go a little bit slower, knowing that Amiras Hashem, we will absolutely catch up. Maybe we'll even record a little bit today. But again, I just want to point out to you, there is a possibility of coming out of these sugyas actually understanding what it is that they're saying. And I will say, if you're in the business world, or even if you're not in the business world, but you're just borrowing money, these are very pertinent sugyas. Not that we're going to become experts in this through Daf Yomi, but at least to understand what a heter iska is, how it works, why it works, is tremendous. So do not lose any sleep over this. We are perfectly on schedule. The journey continues tomorrow. Shkoyach.